Hello, everyone, and welcome to All My Best Friends Are Digital, your podcast about video games and the stories they tell. With me is someone who I know enjoys a good story. Caitlin, how you doing, Caitlin?
I am wonderful. How about you, Mark?
As always, Caitlin, I think wonderful is underselling the picture. I am doing all right. That is what we're hoping for, a stable all right. Anyway, we're going to talk about games we've been playing lately. We're going to talk about Deceptiion 3 Dark Delusion in our retro game segment GOOF for the PlayStation. Our feature game this week is Road Trip to the End of the World, which, believe it or not, is much less emo than Deceptiion Dark Delusion, despite the title. And we're going to close things out with some shameless hyping of upcoming titles. This is on top of the fact that many things that we have been shouting out over the course of the past year are going to be released in quick succession over the course of the next few weeks. So it's going to be a busy month, but a rolling stone gathers no moss, or various other dead idioms that make no sense to me. Caitlin, what have you been playing lately?
I'm about 4 years late on this one, but I decided to play Loop Hero this week. So I'm far from an expert because I've only been playing for, a handful of hours. I've only seen the first boss once. I was not even close to killing it. That's even assuming that there's multiple bosses. I assume there's more than one boss. But for anyone who's unfamiliar, Loop Hero is a game where the big bad has disappeared everything in the world. And when your character regains awareness, he's alone, remembers nothing, so he's got that convenient amnesia, and he can only see the path in front of him.
So I would like to issue a bit of a distinction. This is not necessarily a rigorous one, and I'm not insisting that everyone have this. Plot convenient amnesia, where you can't remember who you made a promise to 10 years ago, and like all these people may or may not have been very, very important in your life. That's the kind of plot convenient amnesia that I find insufferable. Loop Hero, number one, is not a plot-driven game, and number two, the whole idea of forgetting is carried through quite literally in that the entire world has been forgotten. So yes. I don't know that it is entirely fair to put it in the same category as plot convenient amnesia, though I am amused by the parallelism.
Yes. So, yeah, your character shows up on a literal loop, because there's a loop in Loop Hero, and you walk around it in a loop, and you encounter enemies, and when you encounter enemies, they drop gear and cards, and the cards are tiles that you can place in the environment, which is basically your character, quote, remembering where things were.
So, Caitlin, presumably you control your movement along the loop, yes?
No, it is all automated.
But you control what you do during a fight, right?
Nope, that's also automatic.
Huh.
The only choices you get to make in Loop Hero are what gear you equip, and gear drops off of enemies, and where you place the different card tiles that also drop from enemies. There's some strategy with like the gear that you equip. There's various like substats like vampirism and dodge and counterattack. You have to find some combination of those that works for you. I still don't know if there's like a particularly overpowered one of those. I like vampirism just because healing always feels nice, but dodge is also really good too, because just not taking damage is great. But yeah, so I don't really know what I'm doing stats-wise yet. I just kind of see what happens. But also, all these cards that you get, when you place them, sometimes you want to place them in a group, like the rocks and mountains, you put them next to each other, and they give you additional health for adjacent rocks and mountains. But it's pretty cool. I'm having a lot of fun. It's not quite what I expected. Like, I thought that I would be able to do combat, but there's enough.
You thought you'd have slightly more inputs, right?
Yes. But at the same time, at least in the part of Loop Hero where I am right now, I don't feel like I'm just sitting around waiting for stuff to happen. I'm either able to look at gear and see if there's upgrades. I'm able to figure out where I want to put certain cards. I'm having to go into planning mode pretty frequently, which won't pause in the middle of a battle, but will pause after a battle. So you're basically not going to be walking along the loop, and you can place a bunch of stuff while you're doing it. But it's been fun. And then there's a whole thing where you either have to choose whether you want to end your run early by retreating, and you get to take all of the materials that you gathered back to your camp. Or if you die, you don't actually die, but you retreat with 30% of your stuff instead of all of your stuff. Because I guess it's basically like some random person that's in your camp is like, oh no, we need to go help them. And they just grab you and drag you, and it's whatever happens to me nearby.
It's like when you faint in one of those farming games.
It is like that. It's an awful lot like that. But yeah, it's been a fun twist on the roguelite formula for me, so I'm looking forward to playing more.
It's a fascinating design space when you think about it. So there are idle games, there are these auto battlers. Well, as a trend, it's somewhat new, but this is not a new design idiom because I remember there was a PSP game that I quite liked called Half Minute Hero. It was ported to other systems, and it was kind of sort of the same idea. A lot of things were automated, but it was still hanging around the idea of leveling up and a lot of the RPG trappings. Like, the part that really opened my eyes to how Loop Hero worked was when I internalized that, I need to make the loop as dangerous as possible, but not more dangerous than that. Yes. I need it to be so that the hero just survives, because otherwise the hero's not leveling up enough. And indeed, you pointed out one of the early cards you get, which is the stones and mountains, and those you just put out in a grid, and it's not interesting at all. There's this huge area around the eponymous loop, and you just stack the mountains in a dense grid. You only start running out of space near the end of the game, after you've got a whole bunch of upgrades, and you're drawing so many cards, and suddenly you wish you hadn't put those stones there, because you need more room for some of the weird thing. And there's some actually pretty weird interactions that can trigger. There's a whole bunch of secrets, like an emergent economy of, you put that thing next to this other thing. That means you get access to the third thing. Or, you put the vampires next to the daycare. Now you've got a whole bunch of infant vampires, etc., etc., etc. Things of that nature. I'm only half joking about that second one.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what animates the interest behind Loop Hero, because, conceptually, and I approached it with a similar degree of skepticism as to the rhetorical questions that I was posing you. It's like, so what am I doing here in Loop Hero? The answer is very little, but actually quite a bit at the same time. And I had a blast with Loop Hero when it first got released. I played a lot of it back then. And I think we actually, between the two of us, Caitlin, we have a complementary distribution of our lacuna of indie games, where, and if you fold it temporally, we kind of meet up somewhere in the middle. So you're catching up with Slay the Spire and Loop Hero, and I'm catching up with Undertale and Hollow Knight and stuff. And between the two of us, we have a solid background in all these things, which is one of the reasons why I think this is a wonderful partnership in terms of our complementary sets of ignorances. Have you unlocked any of the extra characters yet?
I haven't yet. I could have, and I chose to get the blacksmith instead because I wanted to be able to start with starting gear. But I'm getting close. So I've only played with the intro class so far.
Yeah, I should go back to Loop Hero. I would probably have to start an entirely new session because I only dimly remember how, the intricacies of how the various interactions work. I do remember some of the classes getting pretty wild, which is cool.
I know how that is. So I played like 30 hours of Rogue Legacy 2 whenever it came out. I don't remember when that was. I tried to pick that up yesterday, and I couldn't remember how to do anything, and I was like, you know what? I think if I'm going to play a roguelite, I should play a new one. So
yeah, absolutely. And part of it was just seeing the cards combined with each other in new ways. I was vaguely tempted when I had finished Loop Hero, because I know some people who played a lot of Loop Hero and could not beat the final boss, and just couldn't do it. Which is interesting, especially since normally games like that I'm not very good at either. Like the people who weren't able to finish, I would associate them as being much, much better at this kind of thing, because it is very much a kind of a it pretends like it's an RPG, but it's more like it's closer to Sim City than it is to Diablo, frankly.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's particularly like Sim City, but what you're doing is you're designing the environment, and all the heroism is taken care of by itself.
Yeah.
So, that's why I'm drawing that analogy. And normally, in those contexts and finding out little combinations, typically that's the end result of a process of experimentation that is anathema to me. I will find the pattern that works well enough and never get past that, which is not good for Loop Hero either. That is also a recipe for getting underleveled and showing up to the final fight not being nearly strong enough. Because I'm just a conservative little boy. I find out what works and I just keep doing that. Like many mediocre white men before me. So what made you finally try Loop Hero then?
Honestly, I wanted to play something that wasn't going to be like a whole big long story driven thing. I just wanted something I could quickly pick up and get into quickly. I figured a roguelite would probably be good for that. And like I said, Rogue Legacy was a bit of a bust. I was having a hard time remembering. I didn't remember I could do a spin kick. I had to look that up, and I was like, you know what? If I can't remember one of these basic things, I should probably start it over, and I don't want to start it over. So I decided to pick a new game.
Eminently reasonable.
Yeah.
So, in the anticipation of the release of Lost Eidolons Veil of the Witch, I decided to play Lost Eidolons because I picked that up for a couple bucks from some sale or other. This is a tactical RPG very much in the mold of Fire Emblem. More on that later. That's what we call foreshadowing. And Lost Eidolons is a strange beast. Visually, I think it is precisely calibrated to be unappealing to Mark. It has a kind of aesthetic that I would describe as being very evocative of the PS3 era. I think the early HD era was among some of the ugliest visual design in video game history. You commented recently, Caitlin, that you find that early or even sometimes late PS1 polygonal games you think have aged very, very badly. And we'll get to that later when we talk about Deception 3, no doubt. But to my mind, for my preference, for my aesthetics, there's a kind of charm to PS1 era games. The way they use their pixelated textures to maximum effect, and they're straining desperately to introduce cinematic techniques and flexing graphical muscles that really haven't been available to game designers for quite so long. And so when I go back to some of my favorites, like, for example, Die Hard Trilogy, which objectively is a hideous game, but I think it's got some visual charm. But the early HD era, we made fun of this to a certain extent when we were talking about Gears of War. Just the unrelenting gray and dark brown and black and a certain plasticated sheen over people's faces, right? It's not quite the Uncanny Valley, but it's definitely something that I don't like looking at.
Yeah.
Lost Eidolons looks a little bit like that. A lot of it is just... It suffers by virtue of being overly familiar. Because, again, this kind of aesthetic I'm very, very used to. I'm very accustomed to, and I don't really like it anymore. It's competently done, and it's reasonably well executed. And it's certainly, when I compare it to the sort of PS3, Xbox One era, I don't mean that it looks that primitive in terms of model count or poly count or whatever. Things are much, much smoother. But there's a vague sense from the color palette and the assets they use and the kind of way that human skin is represented that gives me a little bit of that early HD vibe. Granted, this is Ocean Drive Studios. This is a small South Korean publisher, so I can definitely understand some of this. Lost Eidolons was originally crowdfunded. It's a whole thing. I'm not going to criticize it too much, but the overall character design is also very derivative. They've got a very limited set of assets. Like, the moment you've seen one woman, they all kind of dress the same, and in a way that definitely verges towards the hoochie. And so it's just very, very odd in that sense. And also, the voice actors, although all very competent, number one, haven't been given much to work with. More on that in a moment. And number two, not entirely unlike Brave Fencer Musashi, I think that I've heard this cast half a dozen times in half a dozen different dubs for half a dozen different things. I've heard you be this character before. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I know your voice, sir. I know where you're coming. Some people, when they hear like Jennifer Hale or certain voice actors, they're like, oh, great. My favorite actor's in this. Me, I'm the other way around. It's like, no, this is someone else. This is someone... I don't have this reaction when watching movies. When I see famous actors be a new role, I don't immediately think that, oh, no, what's this other character doing in this movie? No, I'm willing to take it as it is. So I don't know why I have this prejudice. And I acknowledge it as such, a prejudice with respect to voice actors. But anyway, so this cast is a cast I've seen before. These models seem like models that I've seen before. The character design isn't all that inspired. And that's one way in which Lost Eidolons, I think, suffers very badly in comparison to Lost Eidolons Veil of the Witch. It wasn't stellar in terms of the writing and voice acting, but the characters were represented, at least in the cutscenes, with hand-drawn art. And so they had a visual distinctiveness to them that these characters don't. Here in their dialogue, it's just the models standing around moving their lips. And that's not quite the same effect. So about the writing, I'm not too deep into the story. It's a pretty stock story of a noble gets killed and the wrong people get blamed, and now you're a mercenary company, blah, 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 blah. I still don't know what an Eidolon is. I mean, I know what it is in Greek tragedy, but I don't know what an Eidolon is in this universe, and I don't know why they got lost. But there's a line... I was willing to forget it the first time I heard it, but then they repeated it again in another cutscene, which was strangely like a summary of the previous cutscene I saw. I will quote it verbatim, Caitlin. I wrote it down word for word. I will not attempt to do the delivery. The delivery was fine, but it's not going to salvage it. This fire raging inside me, I'll quench it with a traitor's blood. That there, Caitlin, is what we call dialogue. And Lost Eidolons, again, it's just a lot of it it's not quite ready for prime time, I don't think.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the gameplay. The fights are really cool. It's very much a Fire Emblem thing. You've got a grid, you've got characters with special abilities. Everybody's got 2 weapon sets, so you can swap to whatever it is that you need to do in a given context. Mm-hmm. And instead of the weapons triangle of Fire Emblem, where axes beat spears, spears beat swords, swords beat axes, you instead have a similar system where certain weapon types are better against certain types of armor, and all of that is very clearly represented with unobtrusive icons on the field. That part's great. And I don't know if it backtracks on this later on, but I did feel like the triangle was exerting a lot more influence than the weapons triangle does in Fire Emblem. Every Fire Emblem game, they're like, all right, look, know the weapons triangle. I'm like, if my stats are good enough, I don't have to care. Like, this unit uses a sword, sure, but it'll go murder spear users all day long because it's just too untouchable. Why are you wasting my time telling me I shouldn't be doing this? This only matters for weaklings, and I do not traffic in weaklings. Anyway, in Lost Eidolons, it seems to matter more. And the fights are great. The pacing is snappy. It's really, really cool. It reminds me a lot of Veil of the Witch in that sense. What kills me for Lost Eidolons, and why I eventually gave up on it, was just the pacing is real, real bad. I installed Lost Eidolons on a handheld PC of mine, actually an ROG Ally X, which I highly recommend. It's a splendid machine. And I figured, okay, I'm going to have a half hour to kill because of a variety of commitments I had. So sitting there in my car playing Lost Eidolons, the entire half hour was taken up by unskippable cutscenes.
No.
And I just couldn't. I was amazed. I was shocked. I kept looking at my watch thinking, is this actually going to, wait, is there, because there weren't any save points in the middle of this.
Of course not.
It made me feel like I was back 20 years ago, where they didn't quite know how to space save points. And some of the cutscenes in Lost Eidolons are skippable, but some of them aren't. And this one wasn't. And so I couldn't advance the dialogue any faster. And so I was just stuck there. It was very strange. Oh. I do not understand why they decided to do things this way. And it wasn't particularly compelling. Like, you already know what I think of the writing. It was more just like, oh, this noble's dead. We're getting blamed for the noble. I guess we got to go on the run. There we go. That took me 5 seconds. Like, you didn't need a half hour. I'm sure there's character development and stuff, but none of the characters struck me as particularly interesting either. It's just a whole thing. So I very much enjoyed the gameplay. I thought the gameplay was great. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go to Lost Eidolons before Veil of the Witch got released. Its pseudo-sequel, which is coming out of early access soon. But I eventually realized, nah, I'm not gonna. And what I did instead was I decided to do a different thing in anticipation of release of Veil of the Witch. This is a transition. This is a surprise switch, Caitlin.
Oh.
Hold on to yourself. I finished Fire Emblem Three Houses instead.
Oh my god, Mark, you did it.
I did it. Now, here's what actually happened. I say I finished it and I mean it, but here's the specifics of what happened was I played 2 battles, and I was reminded of the thing that Fire Emblem does all the time that your snappier tactical RPGs like Lost Eidolons doesn't do, which is those 3 turns in a row of moving your entire army up to get to the front. Yeah. Lost Eidolons doesn't mess around with that crap. I mean, positioning matters. Obviously, it wouldn't be a tactical RPG if positioning didn't matter. But it's not like, okay, I dealt with this wave of enemies. Now I spend 3 turns moving everyone their maximum distance. Then I deal with another wave of enemies, wash, rinse, repeat. And I realized that I didn't have any enthusiasm for playing these battles anymore for that and 2 other reasons. One other reason was by the end of a lot of Fire Emblem games, you get to the point where a lot of your bosses can one-shot a lot of your weaker dudes. Mm-hmm. And so you end up with this huge gulf between the units that can murder anybody and the units that are too vulnerable to risk, and so they don't participate. And so consequently, they end up more underpowered. Or if you bring them up to the front, you have to accept the fact that sometimes they're just going to get one-shotted. But I play with permadeath, so I wasn't willing to deal with that. And the second reason why is because in my head, the story of Fire Emblem Three Houses is done. Everyone's got their maxed out relationships that I want maxed out, right? Mm-hmm. I've made all of the decisions I care about. Everyone's at their final class. Everyone's got their final relationship status. I know which pairings I care about. And so from my perspective, the game was already over, and I was just going through the motions of something relatively mechanical and not even very satisfying at that. Hence why YouTube was invented. I just watched the endings that I cared about on YouTube. There we go. And there's a website where you can click on a person and say, okay, who was their S rank with? And then you click on that and they'll give you the epilogue for every character that you care about. And so I'm done. That's it. Okay. I've seen the ending. I'm finished. Yeah. I didn't need to see the 5, siege of this castle to get access to this. I wasn't even 5 missions away. I was 3 missions away from actually finishing the game. For my purposes, I have now finished Fire Emblem Three Houses. There we go. And thus liberated, I feel a strange sense of virtue, which is entirely irrational. There's no reason to feel like I've done something, but I feel like I've accomplished some sort of great task.
Sure.
And I used that, and I spurred on by this momentum. I am now, once again, knee-deep in Chrono Trigger. So I'm being the virtuous little video gamer and taking care of my backlog. I knew you'd be proud of me, Caitlin.
I'm so proud of you. That's wonderful. I'm very excited for you to make progress.
That means so much to me, Mom. I mean, Caitlin. So yeah, Lost Eidolons was cool. It made me more excited for Veil of the Witch, because Veil of the Witch compensates for precisely those issues that I have with Lost Eidolons, namely the graphic presentation, the pacing, and the storytelling elements. But the core combat engine is still satisfying. And Fire Emblem was disappointing me from the combat engine, and from my perspective, the plot was already done. So I figured, why deny myself this? Why let this dangling? And Chrono Trigger, I'm enjoying both. So hey, why don't I actually play through Chrono Trigger some more?
Absolutely, man. So I opened up the Steam page for Lost Eidolons because I have not played it, and you really weren't kidding about the brown. There's so much brown.
Oh, there's a lot of brown.
I love how games of this era are like, we want things to be realistic, and real life is brown. And it's like, have you looked outside? Like, why is everything brown?
I'm amazed actually how few games that are in some sort of meaningful middle. Games tend to be either like Fire Emblem, brightly colored, elaborate, sort of anime-inspired, cel-shaded stuff. Not that it's Dayglow or anything. It doesn't look like Jet Set Radio or anything of that nature. It's just, looks like some sort of fantasy anime, for both good or ill. And then you have stuff like Lost Eidolons, where it's like, we will be grim and highly representational. And they can't even claim, I would correct you on one thing, I don't think even they can claim defense of, the era, because this was published in 2022.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't it look older?
It does. It looks like it's, at least, mid, early aughts.
If you had told me that this was published at the same time as Gears of War or shortly thereafter, I would have believed you, except it is too high resolution. That is the only thing. Because the color palette, the sort of, again, the stock models that kind of look vaguely reminiscent, the way skin is represented. I'm being overly harsh. It's not that bad. It wasn't hideous to look at, right? I wasn't looking at this and saying, ugh, the graphic engine is outdated. I'm just saying there was a certain lack of polish and a certain retread of things that I haven't seen for a while, and it's probably for the best that we've abandoned them. I personally, I've said this before, I think, even though there were some titles there that I really enjoyed, the PS3 era was the worst video game era of my life. It's kind of
your life.
The indie revolution hasn't quite sunk in yet. AAA gaming is awash in brown. HD is not really being done well, and it's just not a satisfying era of video gaming when compared to the others, as far as I'm concerned.
I think one of the things, this is somewhat unrelated, but one of the things that I don't like about that era is that was when they first started releasing digital-only games on the PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo DS or whatever storefronts. And not all of those games made it off of those storefronts to a more accessible one. And I always found that to be a bummer.
It's true. What with modern Steam ports, we take it for granted that pretty much everything is going to be available at all times forever. And I think, if nothing else, the recent Spielkas with Valve delisting adult content because they knuckled under the payment providers ought to remind us that, yes, so far they've been a benevolent despot, but they're still a despot, and they can yank whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. And we're all at the mercy of their whims. And there are still some exceptions that fall through the cracks, even when the despot allows them to get that. I constantly point to the existence of the PS4 emulator, which exists for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to play Bloodborne. It's utterly hilarious how they don't even make any pretext. It's like, oh, this is the Bloodborne remaster. You mean the PS4 emulator? Oh, yeah, sure, I guess. So, with that, let us move on to our gaming opinions on old school funware. GOOF, we're going to be talking about Deceptiion 3 Dark Delusion for the PlayStation. This was released by Tecmo in 1999. This is the third game in the Deceptiion series, appropriately enough. The first one was called Invitation to Darkness. Oh my goodness, I feel like I need more eyeliner to be talking about these games. It was released in 1996. It was a first-person perspective thing. The sequel was released in 98 called Kagero Deception 2, after the proper name of the protagonist. And now we have 1999's Dark Delusion. Caitlin, why don't you give us a sense of what one does in Deception 3 Dark Delusion?
So, one of the reasons that I had actually suggested Deception 3 Dark Delusion is I thought I had played it. And I was like, oh, yay, I'm excited to... No, I never played the third one. At least if I did, I have no recollection whatsoever. I definitely played the second one. So, whoopsie.
Me too. I had played the second one back in the day. And when you said you'd played the third one back in the day, I figured, we could do this one. So I guess this was new to both of us.
Yeah. So Deception 3 Dark Delusion is the story of Reyna. She is a young woman who on her 17th birthday is captured along with her adoptive mother and brother by King Frederick of Alendor, or rather, his men. When they're presented to the king by Miguel, the two men allude to what they're going to do to Reyna, which I'm glad there was no elaboration on that. Because Reyna's mother is like, hey, you're a bad person. And the king's like, you call me a bad person, I kill you now. So...
That proves his point, I'm sure.
The mom and the little boy both get taken out. So Reyna has to watch them die, and she's very sad. And she gets tossed into a cell until it's time to, for them to deal with her, whatever that means. While she's in there, this young boy named Marco sneaks in, and he tosses her a red stone, which magically disappears when she touches it and gives her the abilities to use traps. And she has to very quickly master that ability because there's guards coming and she needs to use the traps in order to take them out. So she does. And she gets remarkably used to murder very, very quickly. She's upset at first, but the upset lasts for maybe 45 seconds.
She has powerful coping mechanisms, yeah.
Yes. And they manage to escape the jail together. They run into Albert, Marco's older brother, and then they're on the run, and Reyna's constantly in places where people want to either kidnap her or kill her, or steal the blue brooch on her chest that she got as a gift from her mom. And it's a whole thing.
So here is the thing about the Deception series after the first game. You basically need 3 ingredients. Number 1 is some kind of castle. Number 2
yes.
is a hot girl in the castle. Number 3 is an endless stream of various mooks that are willing to enter the castle in an attempt to kidnap aforementioned hot girl for them to be mowed down by a series of traps. It's so weird. Now, everything about these games are bizarre. Yeah. I had forgotten how incredibly gonzo the stories are. It literally is here's a new group of people. We're introduced to them. They're given some reason to go into the castle. Sometimes often they're trying to kidnap this person. Eventually you figured the mountain of corpses would be sufficient incentive for them to leave. There's a certain suspension of disbelief when the people move into the new haunted house and the house is telling them to get out and they don't. Yeah. This is way past that. It's do these mercenaries not talk to each other? It's I'm going to go take this job at this house, and then they're just gone forever. Yeah. It's we're talking 50, 60 guys here that just wander in. It's just one after the other. They have boulders dropping on their heads from this girl who, for whatever reason, has mastered the power of trap. It's so strange. This is setting aside the fact that I still have more familiarity with the second one. Yeah. The plot of the second one, I think, is more gonzo than the third one. Because the second one, there are these time noids that, for whatever reason, in dialogue, are only represented by a letter abbreviation. It's so strange. I don't know. Here, at least, you just have the protagonist who, for whatever reason, people want to kidnap. There's a stone and some magic powers. The second one just took that as, table stakes and then just kept escalating from there.
Yeah, you would think that after King Frederick loses, 10 dudes to this one girl, he'd be like, you know what? Maybe I just concentrate my efforts on other people. But no.
I respect the fact, at least, that in Deception 3, they spend a lot less time with cutscenes. I remember there being a lot more cutscene burden in Deception 2, and certainly coming off of Lost Eidolons, it was certainly a breeze to get to the murder quickly. Because this is look, this is a very sadistic game. This is a game where you are encouraged to set up a whole bunch of traps, so you set up these murderous Rube Goldberg arrangements, whereby the person that is chasing you has a spring trap that launches them into the wall of spears. Then you shoot them with flaming arrows, and then a giant electrified boulder hits them on the head, falling from the ceiling. That's what we call a combo.
Yes.
And you're encouraged. In fact, you're paid more with this currency called Dreek. Look, it's important not to ask the wrong questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you ask the wrong questions about the Deception games, you will never emerge. You have to keep going. You just have to keep powering through.
Yeah.
It is such a bizarre premise for a game.
It is. I mean, so I remember in Deception 2, at least I sometimes would feel like bad for murdering the random people that ended up in the castle. That is not the case, at least with any of the levels that I've played so far in Deception 3, because all of these people are just, they seem willfully, eager to go in there and try to capture this girl. So, I don't know. It's so weird. Yeah, because, like, Reyna appears, other than how quickly she got over her first murder, to be, like, a reasonably well-adjusted person, at least at first. And it's like, she's just, she knows how to talk to other people. She watches her family get murdered in front of her, which is horrible. But, like, she can function like just a regular person. But here she is, like, oh, yep, I need to do some murder, and I need to do really good murder so I can get lots of money that I can spend to upgrade my traps into better murder machines.
So the follow-up, which was delayed by quite some time to Dark Delusion, is called Trapped. Trapt. I don't know if they continue down this vein, but the earlier games really leaned into the sort of emo, trying to be edgelord nonsense. I mean, after all, as a reminder, the first game was called Invitation to Darkness. And in Deception 2, they were trying to who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? Because a lot of the people I remember that you kill in Deception 2 weren't coming here to steal or pillage or kidnap. They were lured into the environment. Right. And your weird psycho mom, as I recall, tells you to go kill them just cuz. At least in Deception 3, you're just in your house and these people just keep coming endlessly. Like in some sort of bus station.
Called Castle Agony at one point.
Yeah, that should have been hit number 2. Hit number 1 is the fact that none of your friends ever came back. But as a mercenary, I think hit number 2 should have been like, ain't no thing. Just go into Castle Agony and everything will be fine. It's like, oh, you mean the one past the Moat of Torment? It's like, yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the gameplay?
So it took a while to get used to it first. I think just coming from more modern games and jumping into Deception 3, I mean, I kept trying to change the camera angle, and it's like, you can't do that, Caitlin. You're not allowed.
Yeah.
You can't look up or down. You can only face behind your character who's looking straight ahead. So, I mean, it kind of sucks because the levels, or the different stages have different levels to them. So there's going to be an upstairs, there's going to be a stairway down, there's going to be a downstairs, sometimes there's water. And it's very difficult to be able to see whether an enemy is crossing into your trap area so that you can activate it if you can't change the camera.
I agree. I think also Deception 3 would have benefited from a turnaround button.
Yes,
which
absolutely.
A lot of tank control games of the PS1 era didn't have, but even while they kept the tank controls in like the PS2 era, more and more games had a turnaround button. Like, for example, once again, God Hand had a turnaround button, and that helps things considerably. And you're right, you don't have a very good visual sense about what's going on, which is problematic because you're in these giant rooms and you're expected to put these traps together in interesting combinations. And frankly, I end up, following up on my comments from Loop Hero, I'm ill-inclined to experiment, given that I don't really feel equipped to anticipate the full implications of whatever the traps I'm putting. So, for example, a very early combo you're introduced to is you trigger a bear trap that pins them in place, and then you hit them with arrows from the wall and a rock from the sky. You have 3 traps that you can equip. One from the ceiling, one for the walls, one for the floor. And this is reasonably effective, does a fair amount of damage. And if you're of a sadistic sort, you can get your yayas out from, dropping a giant boulder from someone. And if you set it up so that you have to set it up so that the boulder rolls down because you can't really set it directly above the bear trap because the game won't let you place 2 traps on the same tile. Even if they're under. Okay, fine. So that requires a tiny modicum of cleverness about where they are. But then there are ones that hurl people various distances. like a floor bomb that you unlock recently. And it tells you that it will send the victim flying some number of tiles away. But it doesn't tell you what direction.
Yeah.
So on top of the fact that the camera's fighting you for trying to see when people are standing over the bomb when you're going to detonate it, you don't really know where they're going to go. And so this idea of setting up a 4 or 5 factor chain reaction of things never really felt like it was under my control. And so I would just take the low-hanging fruit and do the thing I've been doing all this time, which is kind of unsatisfying because it gets super repetitive.
Yeah, I tried the floor bomb once because I was hoping like, oh, I'll launch them into this other thing. I never managed to launch my victim to where I actually wanted them to be. Half the time they got launched off the platform onto the ground, and then I had to wait like 3 minutes for the wounded person to very slowly come back up the stairs. So it just wasn't worth it.
And all the environmental traps are poorly explained. Like, there is an incredibly robust training mode. I will give them that. And this is new to Deception 3. Deception 2 didn't have this, and so it was, in some ways it was even worse in Deception 2. But I'll give you one example. Very early on, it's a big house. You can go to whatever room you want. This is very much kiting the game. You're kiting your enemies the entire time. And I generally don't like kiting enemies a whole bunch, so that's an additional frustration. Yeah. But there's this one room trap that it's not one you place yourself. It just starts out that way, where you drop a chandelier if you go and trigger to the right place. Okay, fine. How long does it take the chandelier to fall? Well, it's a consistent distance, but it's one that you have to kind of get used to. But it's a timing that's different from the next room's trap over, which causes a drawbridge to fall on people's heads. So, consequently, again, I'm expected to try to figure out this timing, but I don't really feel like I've got the tools to do it properly all the while. And I can only even figure out the timing or figure out the targeting if I'm facing the right way.
Yes.
Which, again, the camera's fighting me for that, too. And so, consequently, by the time I do the 6th, 7th, 8th mission, doing the same bear trap arrow rock, maybe the arrow's on fire. Maybe the rock's on fire. Maybe the arrows are electrified. Maybe the rock's electrified instead. Still not a whole lot of variety.
Yeah.
So it's a gonzo premise, and it at least doesn't waste too much of my time in cutscenes. But the novelty wears off quickly, I think.
Yeah, also, obviously, my memory betrayed me a little bit, because I didn't remember, at least in Deception 2, only being able to place one of each trap at a time. I guess I was hoping it would feel a little bit more like Orcs Must Die or like Tower Defense-y, where you could set up a number of traps and lead enemies through them.
You are strangely restricted by the formula, yeah. And that further limits the number of specific combos that you're inclined to lay out. And it is a serious problem when they call it a tactical RPG. I don't know what else I'd call it. Like, trap-based murder simulator is not really an established genre in video gaming, so I guess tactical RPG will have to work. But trust me, this is light years away from Lost Eidolons, Fire Emblem, or anything of the nature.
Yeah.
It's just, there are so many ways that the game subtly encourages you not to experiment, not to vary from the path, not to try new things, not to exploit that additional detail. Like, I'm sure there are people who take to puzzles and are really inclined to work out that one perfect trap combination.
Yeah.
And indeed, there's a missions mode that encourages you to do that. And when I saw the mission requirements, I immediately noped out of that menu because I was ill-inclined.
Yeah.
But it is somewhat dispiriting to hear someone who is more positively inclined towards traps and weird airsats timing combinations, to hear that you, too, were similarly disinterested in testing this engine to its limits.
I tried a couple different things, but ultimately, I mean, it was hard to convince myself to go away from the bear trap, arrow trap, boulder combination because it worked really well. And why would I move from something that's working really well to something that's not working really well? Also, like, upgrading everything was fairly expensive, so it's not like I had a lot of money to pour into all my different traps to try a bunch of different things. I had a lot of fun learning that first combination, be like, oh, this is cool, like, oh, but, like you said, doing a few levels of that, then it's just getting pretty samey. And the whole time you're just running away from dudes who are very slowly following after you. And it's the worst when, like you said, it would have really benefited from a turnaround button, because the number of times that you are placed 3 squares away from an enemy who's running at you, and you have to very slowly shuffle in place to turn around. It's like, come on.
I do really appreciate the premise. I do really appreciate that it is trying something super different. And I
Yeah.
remember really enjoying Deception too. So I think a lot of that was more about having the camera issues bother me less, having the novelty of the premise carry through more.
Same.
What I'm thinking now is that what Deception 3 could have been, or could be now, is like a 3 to 4 hour indie that doesn't expect you to play through 30 missions of very, very small incrementalism, but of tighter maps where it's like, okay, well, in order to get through this particular story mission, you have to exploit what's going on in the room, but you have a slightly better ability to perceive the environment around you. Things of that nature, because it really is very different from everything else on the market, and that is something in it to its favor. It just doesn't do a whole lot with it, I don't think.
Yeah, I think if you'd been encouraged more to use what's available to you in the room already, that might have been more interesting. As it was, you could just completely ignore it. And half the time, I didn't know, like, okay, that's a spear wall. How does that spear wall activate? Apparently, it just spears every now and then, so somebody just needs to be in front of it. But I wish some of that just came together a little bit more nicely.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, absolutely very unique concept. And that's one of the things that still makes me think fondly on Deception 2, even to this day.
So, with difficulty, we will turn away from our invitation to darkness. We will take a brief break for some ads. And we're back. And now onto our feature game, which is Road Trip to the End of the World. This is a free game available on Steam. This was released by Alex Lee and Shark and Pelican Games. This is a graphic adventure game about... well, it's about a lot of things. Caitlin, why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, Road Trip to the End of the World is the story of Andy, Fishy, and also kind of Bora. Bora's like not really in the game at all, but she is a central character to Andy and Fishy. Fishy isn't real, which is a little
Is she?
I mean, I had a really hard time with this actually, because Fishy is clearly like interacting with things every now and then. Fishy clearly is served meals.
I should interrupt you. We will get back to Fishy in short order, I have no doubt.
But long story short, Andy and Fishy are driving from Boston to, I believe, Sacramento, California. So they're driving across the entirety of the United States.
Also known as the Caitlin Shuffle.
Yes, I did a very similar drive. And they are trying to make it to Bora's wedding, which they have been, well, not they, which Andy has been uninvited from. She has a torn up save the date, but she wants to make it there to Bora's wedding in an effort to do something, whether it's closure or whatever.
So this is a very common story setup, which is to say, not the specifics of trying to crash a wedding to which you were uninvited. That specific twist is one I confess is novel and refreshing. The fundamental core thematic structure is 20-something adrift in life. All right? Now, most of the time, I confess, when I've been exposed to this is dudes who are aspiring authors with daddy issues and or alcohol problems. And I'm not saying that those stories aren't interesting, but I take it from your reaction that you too have experienced that precise combination far too many times.
Oh, yes. Very common.
Yeah, so from The Graduate on down, like we're very accustomed to sort of the notes, but here we have Andy who was pressured into going to med school because of the influence of her mother, and has basically, by her description, we don't really know about this. A lot of what we know about the events of the game come from Andy, and by her own admission, she is not necessarily an unreliable narrator, but she definitely has her own view on events.
Yes.
And Andy's explanation is that she couldn't handle med school. We don't know if this was a grades problem, a workload problem, a temperament problem, whatever. But she's dropped out of med school, and the relationship, her childhood friend Bora, they'd been inseparable for a very, very long time. And now the friendship is, let's just say, at the very least, fraught.
Yes.
The invitation to the wedding is rescinded, and hence the decision to impulsively and spontaneously drive to crash the wedding. And we know that it's impulsive largely because, for two reasons. One of them is the timeline is such that there's no time to waste. She's decided to do this only to give her just enough time to drive there. And because of various exchanges that she has with Fishy. The two main characters of the story aren't Andy and Bora, or indeed Andy and her mother, but Andy and Fishy.
Yes.
Fishy was Andy's pet fish as a child. The fish died, and Bora suggested, in Andy's grief, that Fishy become their imaginary friend, and that was a way to keep Fishy alive. And now, on top of that, Fishy is riding shotgun on the drive west from Boston to Sacramento. Would you describe Fishy visually, please? Because I've tried and I haven't done a good job.
Fishy is... Okay, if you take, like, the front half of a fish, so, kind of like it has fins and, up through the tip of its nose, snout, whatever, that's Fishy's head. But then below that, Fishy is more, young toddler shaped. Fishy has arms and legs. The eyes are like these really big, like saucer-like eyes. They're very cute. When I first looked at this at Road Trip to the End of the World and saw the still with Fishy in the in the driver's seat. Oh, that'd be bad. In the passenger seat.
Woof.
I thought Fishy was a stuffed animal, and that would have almost made more sense. But I'm pretty sure Fishy just doesn't have... Fishy is a product of Andy's imagination at this point and has manifested for this drive. Whereas before, she was not visible.
The thing that gets me about Fishy is two things. To a certain extent, it's the pink overalls that she wears. She wears kinds of Oshkosh bagosh, like patched overalls. And it's difficult to describe. Her body is vertical. It's like a fish standing on its rear fins. And if a fish were standing on its rear fins, its mouth, the slit of its mouth would be perpendicular to the ground. And that is exactly how Fishy is represented.
Yeah.
Her head is always straight up. So it's like she's looking at people through the side or something. It's a whole thing. She doesn't, like, if she were represented as more anthropomorphic, her face would be at a 90-degree angle. And, like, but it's just, it's so adorable. And I cannot get over the way that Fishy is represented. And this is a consequence of the way that Bora drew her when they were young girls.
Yes.
And now Fishy has come to life. It's kind of implied that Andy may have forgotten about Fishy at various times in her life, but now Fishy's back.
Yeah.
And yeah, the role that Fishy plays in the plot is confusing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that I would go so far as to call it confused, if you get my drift.
Yes. Fishy is strange in that she seems designed to kind of give some voice to Andy's subconscious in some ways. That, like, Fishy has a perfect memory. And, at one point, Fishy is singing along to a song and singing along with the lyrics. And you can hear, as the player of the game, you can hear the song playing. And the way you hear it, Fishy recites it wrong. And Andy calls her out on it. It's like, that's not the way the lyrics go. The lyrics are this. And Fishy's like, nope. And then you hear it correctly. Like this, the correct lyrics are played through. And you're like, oh, okay. And the song very clearly is related to Bora, who made this playlist, by the way, for the road trip. It's a whole thing. Andy and Bora haven't been close for some time. They had a friendship breakup, more or less. But Bora's influence is all over this road trip.
Yeah, her shadow looms large, despite the fact that as a character, she's not much there. We don't hear much from her. We don't have anything from her perspective, except for a couple of Andy's recollections of conversations they had, which are kind of doled out over the course of the story.
Yeah.
And which is one of the reasons why Fishy is so important, because I would argue that Fishy thematically is a representation of the friendship between Andy and Bora. Mm-hmm. Like, she is a personification and a manifestation of Andy's conception of the bond that she has with Bora, and also the bond that she has with an earlier version of herself.
Yeah.
Plus some things that are, but complicating that vision is the fact, two details. Number one, again, Fishy interacts with elements of the material world and other characters in ways that are strange and difficult to explain.
Yes.
And number two, Fishy has her own desires, particularly related to cheeseburgers.
Yes.
And the notion of a fish really, really enjoying beef is something that I try not to think about because it creeps me out for reasons that I find difficult to express. She eats chips. She eats cheeseburgers. she at one point talks to another person and the other person seems to be able to hear her. I don't know if this is Andy hallucinating. Anyway, the game doesn't lean on these things.
No.
This is not some like very psychological, what's going on, unreliable narrator stuff. These are just weird details that kind of stick in the mind. I don't know. How do you feel about this ambiguity of how Fishy interacts with people who are not Andy?
Overall, I can look past it. There is one particular scene in which Andy is frightened and Fishy does something to protect Andy. And that one I can't get out of my head because it's like I don't understand what happened here. What actually happened here if Fishy doesn't exist?
There are a number of possible explanations. I agree that none of them are particularly satisfying, and none of them, I think, fit very cleanly with the rest of the narrative. Yeah. I don't know that it's necessarily a problem. I personally think, for what it's worth, that this is the author just having a bit of a lark. Yeah. It's just a flourish of oddness for the sake of oddness. Specifically with respect to Fishy, not the entire scene. And to a certain extent, for the story to make sense, Fishy has to be a character unto herself.
Yes.
Even though she represents a variety of things that are independent of the anthropomorphic talking fish, Fishy still has to be a character and not just some sort of manifestation or sounding board. Like, there have been tons and tons of times where people are talking to their dead father or dead whatever, and it's clearly just in their own head and whatever. Fishy needs to be more than that for the story to work the way that it does. And for what it's worth, I'm glad that it is that way.
I agree. I think that, I mean, if it were anything else, I don't know. I don't think it would feel as good through the conclusion of the story.
So in terms of the gameplay, Road Trip to the End of the World has close to no decisions. It is just click to the next thing, visual novel style adventure game kind of deal. And to that end, we have to care a great deal about its presentation and the overall story.
I love the art. Like you said, Fishy is just the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. I love her. I desperately want a Fishy plushie. The story I thought was really neat. I don't know if we see enough stories about, friendship breakups. And I really liked seeing Andy kind of come to terms with what happened over the course of the story. Is that a spoiler? I'm not sure.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say come to terms, to watch Andy grapple with the ramifications of what's going on in her life.
No, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Watching Andy grapple with it.
Again, we've seen a million coming-of-age stories about young 20-somethings who don't know what they want to do with themselves. And usually, it's about that. And quite frankly, I don't know if this is going to make me sound unsympathetic. I've never been particularly jazzed about those issues, because there are some kinds of things that are super important and super overwhelming when you're going through them, and I, as a viewer, don't really care about them as stories. They matter to the people involved, they really do, and I'm deeply sympathetic to people feeling that kind of angst. But I don't really need to see another story of, again, usually some dude, some 22-year-old dude who's like, yeah, I got into college, man, but this major, I don't know, man, just whatever, and my dad's on my case. Like, oh, come on. A million times have we seen this. Instead, we use that sense of dislocation and ennui as the backdrop to a story about a friendship falling apart, which I find a much more fascinating lens, both narratively and emotionally, to come to grips and experience what Andy is feeling at these crossroads in her life. Like, whether or not you decide to go to one school or another or pursue one major or another, yeah, super important to you, but I don't care. But everyone's had a friendship fall apart. And you're exactly right, there are so few stories, certainly in video games, that really grapple in a seriously, emotionally nuanced way with the dissolution of a very serious friendship. Lost love, sure. Lost family member, absolutely. But friendships falling apart, seldom. And I found it super refreshing and extraordinarily well done.
Yeah, I really liked how the story comes out slowly over the course of the road trip. Because all you know at the very beginning is that, she and Bora aren't close anymore, and Bora is marrying this jerk named Martin or Marvin or something like that. He sucks.
Oh, we hate him so much. He sucks.
We hate him so much. But then learning over time, some of the things that happened before this falling out, I thought that the way it was uncovered was really interesting.
I agree, and I think it culminates in an ending that is, frankly, pitch perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
I thought it was an extraordinarily good balance of resolution and absence of resolution, for what it's worth, without going into more detail than that. How long did it take you to play?
I believe it took me just over an hour, maybe 65 minutes.
Took me about 50.
Yeah.
And I would have happily paid $5.
Yeah.
Or more. Like, I think it's extraordinarily well done. The fact that it's free, this was apparently a thesis project that is just being distributed on Steam by Shark and Pelican Games, who've done a couple of other vaguely in the same style, weird gonzo visual novel things. One of them is about tabletop role-playing and romance, and the other is about weird sci-fi robots and romance. And I'm vaguely curious to see their other stuff. I know that Steam has free games on there, even ones that aren't free to play. You know, free-to-play games that cost you $1 million, but like genuinely free games. But I was not expecting a story this well told. I was extraordinarily pleased with my time with Road Trip to the End of the World, especially given the barrier to entry. This will run on almost anything, and it won't cost you a penny, and it will respect your time.
Yeah.
It moves along at a great clip. Highest possible recommendation. I was thoroughly moved by Road Trip to the End of the World. I think it's great, and everyone, I think, should meet Fishy.
Everyone should meet Fishy. Fishy is exactly who we need for this era.
Fishy is the hero we need at this moment in time. I couldn't agree more. With that, let us move on to our shameless hyping of upcoming titles, our Shout segment. Caitlin, what would you like to shamelessly hype?
So this might be old news for some of you, but I dropped the ball and just learned that there is a DLC coming out for Rabbit in Steel. I am very excited. The goal is to have it done by the end of the year. There's going to be 4 new classes, new bosses, new stages, new loot. I'm very excited and really looking forward to having another excuse to jump into Rabbit in Steel.
I have been very eagerly following the updates from the author.
Yeah.
Because Rabbit in Steel completely took me by surprise, and I think it's a brilliant game that is criminally underlooked. Nobody seems to be talking about Rabbit in Steel, despite how well it's done and how, quite frankly, unique and compelling it is.
Mm-hmm.
And more Rabbit in Steel is all for the good.
Yeah. Everyone should give it a shot. Or maybe a few shots, because it can be difficult. But it's good.
I would like to shout out Spirit X Strike. This is by Maicha Studio. It is currently on early access, but as longtime listeners know, we do not give early access the time of day. I am waiting for it to be a real game for real grown-ups. It is a kind of beat-em-up / spectacle fighter thing. I'm getting various vibes of God Hand from the fact that you're encouraged to experiment and make your own combos, but at the same time, the action is very over-the-top. The kind of thing where you send people flying 20 feet in the air from a punch kind of deal. Just over-the-top martial arts action coupled with some brawler sensibilities. I'm all over stuff like that, and I am very keen to see how it develops. And someday it may be a real game, and at that point I will try it. That is Spirit X Strike.
Nice. I love when games become real games.
Every time a bell rings, that means a game comes out of early access.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for All My Best Friends Are Digital. If you'd like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/amfad. We have tons of bonus content and some good stuff to check out. You can vote on what we're going to cover. There's some bonus episodes and our award-eligible newsletter where we follow up with the games that we talk about on our podcast. But at any rate, thank you for spending the time. That is the most valuable resource you have, and we appreciate you being with us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us at allmybestfriendsareddigital@gmail.com. Hope to see you again soon.